5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The corporate tax issue is one that we need to be very, very careful about. I appreciate the gentleman raising the issue. The evidence over the last 15 years indicates that those companies that have successfully reduced their corporate tax rate into the one-digit and maybe the 10% rate have done so. The result of having done so is to lay off thousands or tens of thousands of American workers and to use that reduced tax rate or the revenue from the reduced tax rate to buy back stock and corporate executive pay. So we need to be very, very careful as we approach this. Clearly, a lower tax rate for corporations could be properly structured a significant economic boom. But presently, if you take a look, AT&T, for example, GE, and a couple of other major corporations, including Apple, that have very, very low tax rates, are not creating jobs in America. So just a heads up on that. Also, the Buy America provisions, all of you talked about that, extremely important. If you want to build jobs in America, make it in America. The President talks about it. Good for him. Good for us if we actually cause it to happen. So be careful. All of you gentlemen discuss this. There's a horrible disconnect and a very, very serious problem in a disconnect between the rhetoric, in this case, infrastructure, building infrastructure, funding infrastructure, and what is actually happening in Congress. This week, we will pass a budget. Well, some of us will vote for a budget, and it will pass, that has the potential of significantly reducing by a tune of $2.5 trillion, maybe as much as $5 trillion, revenue for the federal government. If we're going to build infrastructure, these very extraordinary revenue reductions that are embedded in the budget that will pass the House this week will not happen. There will be no money for infrastructure investment. The current, so let's be very, very careful here as we talk about tax reform, as we talk about budgets, and all of the witnesses today, and this is not the first panel that's been in this room, saying we need more money. There is a serious, serious disconnect between our political statements of building infrastructure and the reality of what the tax reform and the budget that will pass the House this week will do to funding availability. Secondly, it's been suggested that we increase the excise tax on fuel. Good idea. However, in today's press, General Motors within the next decade will be out of the internal combustion engine business. So tell me how that works. We need to move beyond the excise tax on fuel as we raise revenue, fees, from the motoring public, whether that's commercial or private automobile. We simply cannot rely upon the excise tax on fuel as a funding source for the highway programs. Note that about 30%, 25% of the total highway funding is general fund, which is scheduled to be reduced in the tax reform programs. So my point here, and this is not, this I guess sort of preaching hopefully to the sinners and not to the choir, but the reality is that there is a very serious disconnect between what we talk about doing in this infrastructure committee and what we are doing in the tax committees. They simply do not work together. My final point is Buy America is extremely important. Make it in America is extremely important. The testimony we've received today about ways in which foreign state-owned companies can dramatically alter the ability of American companies and American workers. The issue of waivers and inconsistencies, all of which you have talked about in one way or another. I am particularly interested, Mr. Moorman, in your point, which you say in your testimony about the Buy America. I'm not sure that you like it or dislike it, but I will tell you, you must have it. The Siemens operation in Sacramento is a marvelous example of where some $700 million was spent on Amtrak locomotives, all 100% American-made. I assume that is continuing to be your position?
Absolutely. We
Perfect.
certainly support Buy American, and in addition to the Siemens locomotives, we have a commitment for over $2 billion for new Acela train sets, all of which will be built by Alstom in upstate New York. So,
which raises the question of the Siemens-Alstom merger and what effect that might have on American employees. Right. Mr. Chairman, I am 30 seconds over time. Please forgive me.
Mr. Chairman, could I answer one of Mr. Garamendi's questions? That is, how do we fund
you're recognized for a brief response.
Thank you, sir. How to fund the Highway Trust Fund given the technology that's coming down the road. I mentioned in my opening statement, I don't think you were in the room, we recommend a weight distance tax, which is already in existence in your neighbor to the north in Oregon, which I think is fair because it is based upon what is the damage that a particular vehicle does to the infrastructure and measured by the vehicle miles traveled. So that would be one way to get
well, the chairman and I do not travel in the right-hand lane of Interstate 5 in California for the very reason of destruction of the roadbed. By passenger cars? I doubt it.
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi. Mr. Sanford, you're recognized for 5 minutes.